Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're driving straight into the fascinating psychology of human connection. Okay, picture this. Your phone buzzes. It's yet another group chat invitation. But instead of a rush of excitement, you just feel, well, completely and utterly drained, right? It's this heavy, exhausting feeling of forced social interaction. So many of us experience it, but we kind of rarely talk about it out loud.
So it really begs a crucial question. Why do those invites feel so draining? I mean, you might stare at that text and realize you'd genuinely rather spend your Saturday reorganizing a dusty bookshelf than sitting at some loud brunch table, making small talk about things you literally don't care about. And for the longest time, societal pressure has made people with this mindset feel like they're somehow, I don't know, broken, or that they need some kind of social upgrade. But actually, the truth is entirely different.
Section 1. Are you actually broken? The science of social circles.
To really get to the bottom of this, we have to look at some fantastic research out of the University of Chicago. They completely distinguish between two entirely different human experiences. Now, our culture constantly mashes them together into one big negative concept, but science tells a very different story. First up, there's loneliness. Now, this is that painful, distressing feeling that your social needs just aren't being met. It's a literal ache. But on the flip side, we have chosen solitude. This is feeling completely content living a relatively solitary life. You can be surrounded by dozens of people at parties every weekend and feel profoundly lonely. Or you can live a very solitary life and feel entirely whole. It's all about whether your connections actually align with what your own nervous system needs. Let's put this into perspective. Think about someone you know who has just 3 close, lifelong friends. People they've known since college. Now contrast that with someone who has 800 Instagram followers, but still feels totally empty inside. The difference isn't about the raw number of people in your orbit. It's a fundamental issue of quality over quantity. Those 3 deep connections provide this grounding value that hundreds of digital followers simply cannot match. Not even close. So how do we actually measure this? Well, psychologists use something called the UCLA Loneliness Scale. It's a super interesting tool because it doesn't just count your friends. Instead, it measures the quality of feeling seen, understood, and valued. It uses these contrasting statements, asking people to rate things like, I feel isolated, versus there are people I can talk to. And the absolute most fascinating takeaway here, 2 people with the exact same size social network can live completely opposite answers. It absolutely proves that isolation is a subjective, internal experience, not an objective headcount. Section 2, the psychology of solitude, what researchers have quietly documented. Researchers have actually been quietly documenting for decades that people who prefer a smaller circle aren't hiding at all. They're actually utilizing a hidden superpower, emotional self-regulation. This is basically the psychological ability to handle your own feelings without constantly handing that job off to someone else. If you're someone who prefers solitude, your superpower is that you can just sit there with your own thoughts. There's no panic, there's no desperate scramble for your phone or another person just to nervously fill the silence. You can self-soothe and process your inner world completely independently. How cool is that? And this self-regulation naturally builds into broader personality traits. Folks who embrace solitude typically share 3 key characteristics: high self-awareness, emotional independence, and intrinsic motivation. Now, that last one is huge. It means they do things because those things matter to them intrinsically, not because they're out there farming for external approval. And because they aren't constantly seeking validation, when they do reach out to connect, they're doing it from a place of being whole, which inevitably leads to much deeper, far more legitimate relationships. Consider the sheer scale of this number for a second. 30,000. In a massive aging study that looked deeply into social isolation, researchers found something incredibly fascinating. Out of these 30,000 participants, which is like filling up a whole stadium, they identified a significant group of people who were socially isolated, meaning they had very small networks, but who reported incredibly low loneliness. They weren't suffering at all. In fact, these individuals often functioned better than people with massive, popular social circles who still felt internally disconnected. This perfectly aligns with a powerful observation from Albert Einstein. He said, the monotony and solitude of a quiet life stimulates the creative mind. And there is actually compelling modern neuroscience backing up Einstein's point here. When you step away from constant social performance, you stop burning all this energy on reading faces, managing complex group dynamics, and performing expected social scripts. You are quite literally freeing up your brain's bandwidth. So, What exactly does the brain do with all that extra bandwidth? Well, it enters a state of divergent thinking. This is a mental state that allows for the exploration of multiple solutions, making really unusual connections and generating original ideas. And the kicker? This happens entirely without the pressure to conform to groupthink. People with few friends aren't missing out on inspiration. They are actively creating the necessary quiet space for it to arrive. It's like a blank canvas.
Section 3. When isolation becomes dangerous. The physiological risks of loneliness.
Now, it's incredibly important that we look at the full picture here, specifically data from the National Institute on Aging. Chronic perceived isolation is genuinely dangerous to your health, entirely regardless of how many people are physically around you. This is a very firm caveat in the research. If you feel fundamentally alone in the world, even if you're standing right in the middle of a crowded room, that chronic feeling of perceived isolation negatively affects your attention, your cognition, and your behavior in some very real ways.
The scientific data checks the long-term health impacts of this persistent loneliness over decades of a person's life, and the impacts are severe. We're talking measurable cognitive decline, serious cardiovascular problems, and disruptive behavioral changes. So look, the goal is never to isolate yourself to the point of chronic distress. The real goal is to find exactly the right amount of connection that prevents this distress in the first place.
Section 4. Finding your social alignment. Moving beyond the cultural mandate. So we have to ask, does your current social setup actually align with what you personally need? If you look at people who are truly thriving with few friends, you'll see a few core traits. They have strong internal compasses, they're highly comfortable with introspection, and they possess something psychologists call self-concept clarity, which really just means they know exactly who they are without needing constant, real-time feedback from the people around them. They've learned that solitude isn't some empty void, it's a canvas.
Essentially, we're looking at a spectrum model of human connection here. On one side, you have a psychological profile that genuinely needs daily interaction with multiple friends to feel alive and energized. But on the other side, you have a profile that needs just one or two deep connections, followed by lots of alone time to recharge. And what's so fascinating is that neither profile is wrong. Neither profile is inherently healthier. They're just shaped differently by personality and neurobiology. We fall into a massive trap when we assume everyone requires the exact same social diet.
So, I want to leave you with a final provocative question. Does your life match what you actually need, or are you forcing yourself into a social mold that just leaves you feeling drained and inauthentic? It is time we stop pathologizing our unique needs. The person with 50 acquaintances isn't winning, and the person with 2 close friends and a rich internal life certainly isn't failing. Honor your specific place on the spectrum of human connection. And hey, don't be afraid to choose the quiet, even when the world keeps loudly telling you to choose the crowd.